This is lesson 4.5, Camera and Perspective Viewports. In this lesson you will learn how to place a camera, you will learn how to control cameras, you'll learn how to create a perspective viewport from a camera, and you'll learn to edit a perspective viewport. Back to Vectorworks. We're going to learn about cameras, how we can use them to create viewports, and we're going to put those viewports on sheet layers. And all of this can be done by using Vectorworks fundamentals. So tools, workspaces, and we can go back to fundamentals because we're not drawing walls, and we can do all of this with the standard Vectorworks fundamentals. I'm going to zoom out so I can see what I want here. And I can either place my camera in a plane view or in a 3D view. Let's start by placing our camera in our plane view. So visualization toolset. We need our RenderWorks camera, this one here, and we're going to click for the location of the camera and then click where the camera is looking. So it's looking into that area. So these are the controls for my RenderWorks camera. I got my eye height about 5 feet. We can activate the camera, we can set the camera view to match. We want our perspective projection. We want to use OpenGL maybe. We can choose our aspect ratio. So this is standard photograph. 16:9 is widescreen television, common television now. Our field of view, around about 65 degrees is quite common. Our focal length 31 degrees. So if you're used to a 35mm camera, you might find that you're used to shooting with a 28mm lens. I think it's around about 72 or something. And so we can change all of these later anyway if we want to. Let's click OK, and we'll start with that just to get going. Now, in my classes here, you can see I've got a lot of things turned off. So I'm just going to hold down the Alt key or the Option key and click on the eyeball column. All my classes are now turned on. If I say Activate Camera, so here just on my Object Info palette, my camera selected, I go Activate Camera, there's my view. We want our layer options to be Show Snap Others. And we might want to increase the quality of our OpenGL rendering. So let's look at our OpenGL options. We're going to go to very high, maybe draw the edges, maybe use shadows, and set those on high. Now the problem with using shadows, of course, is that we haven't got a light. And putting in a sunlight will make a huge difference to this. We're going to use a standard light, using our directional light, and I'll just double click to start with. Okay, we want to use soft shadows, and OK. And so there's our light, so you can see what's happening now. There's our light from this direction. It's casting a shadow on my building, and it does make a huge improvement. So let's go back to our camera. So here I can click on my camera, and you might notice that the camera's in a different layer and it's not selecting. Right click and then force select will force Vectorworks to make the changes it needs to in order to select that camera. Once I've got my camera selected, I can then start to have fun with it. So I can now make a viewport from it. But just before we make a viewport from it, let's just go back up here. I'm going to activate this particular view because the camera should still be selected. Let's make sure our camera is selected. We want to make sure we're in this view here. So let's just click on that view there. So that's my active view. And what we'd like to look at is some of these options that we've got here. Because there are camera effects. Depth of field is one of them. Depth of field requires you understand what these mean. These are the f-stops or the aperture. And when we set the aperture to a specific amount, for example a 1.2, that is a very narrow depth of field. So what we should end up with, some of my image should be out of focus, some should be in focus, and some at the back should be out of focus. So the depth of field is the part of the image that is in focus based on the depth here. So for example, if we make this our part where we're dealing with our focus, we should find that the bits here are out of focus and the bits back here are out of focus. And the length along this line gets smaller as you choose a smaller f-stop. When we choose an f-stop like f22, then it's in focus from down here all the way back to there, so you get a lot of in focus. If we choose f1.2, we get very little. So let's click to set our focus point. Let's choose that point there, and let's update that view. So let's click here and update our view. Now we're using OpenGL at the moment. If we change to fast or final quality Renderworks would be a good one to see the differences. And we should really see here some of these camera effects. So we should start to see things that are in focus and things that are out of focus. Let's just make sure we've selected our camera. And one of the nice things about rendering your view is you get a lot of control over the quality of the rendering and the background, all that sort of stuff. But we'll look at that once we get into creating our viewport. So let's select our camera, up to view on the menu bar, and create viewport. Now the first time you do this, you should get a similar warning dialog box that we got the first time we used a rectangle to make our viewports. The selected Renderworks camera object may be used for the viewport's view. Do you want to link the Renderworks camera object to the viewport? When you say yes, the camera will disappear from the design layer and will be embedded into the viewport, and the only way for you to see that camera again is to edit that viewport. I'm going to say always do the selected action, and yes. So here's our viewport. So this is our perspective view. That's my label, that's my viewport name. So let's copy that because I want that to be on a new sheet layer. So this is 001, and these are my views. And OK. We need a label for this, so let's give that a label. And it's drawing number 1. We'll create the label. You don't have to. You can turn that off so you don't create the label. Now, which layers do we want to see? Well, we want the roof layer, and we want that to be visible. Click OK. What classes do we want to see? Well, really, we want to see everything at the moment, except for non-plot. We don't want to see that. OK. What scale do we want? This is fixed at the moment, but we can change that, and I'm going to show you how we can just stretch it. Detail level, we want that to be very high. This will only affect specific objects, in particular the objects that are using the hybrid symbol nature. So it doesn't matter what we do with that. We want this to be final quality Renderworks. We want a background, which will be HDRI sky, mostly sunny. So it'll give us a lovely background, and OK. And here we are here on our sheet layer. So let's just have a look here. This is our sheet layer. Let's fit to page, and you can see there's our page setup, and there's the size of my viewport. Quite big compared to my piece of paper. File on the menu bar, because I want to go to page setup. Let's set up our page. It wants to be an A3, so 11 by 17. So I'll click on my printer setup. This is going to be A3 size. So it's a landscape A3. Okay, that's fine. Yep, those are fine. Click OK. Now you might notice that this is actually quite big still on my piece of paper. There's no room for my title block. Now I can't just squeeze this, I can't stretch it. If I make this into a group, modify, group, you'll see I've got these handles at the corners, and I can stretch that to the size that I want. I can bring that into my view, bring it into my sheet layer, and then ungroup it. Right click, ungroup, and there it is there. There's my viewport. Now when I update it, it should render, and it should have high quality rendering, and it should have a nice background to it. Now we've already learned, I think, that you can drag a copy of things using the Control or the Option key on a Macintosh, and we can drag a copy. What I've done is I've dragged a copy of a viewport. Right click, let's edit the design layer. So just at the moment what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off my multiple view panes. Right click, let's edit the camera. Takes me back to my design layer. There it is there. And I want to go back to a top plan view. When I go back to a top plan view, there's my camera. If I click and drag that camera view, I can move my camera around, Make sure I've got the view that I want. Let's return to a viewport. Now you don't see the change, but when I update, you'll see it's now looking at that house from the other side. So you'll notice that you can use a camera to create a viewport. You can then duplicate those viewports and then edit the camera, which is quite handy. This is the end of lesson 4.5. In this lesson you learned how to place a camera, you learned how to control cameras, you learned how to create a perspective viewport from a camera, and you learned to edit perspective viewports.